The operating room was supposed to be a temple of control, precision, and certainty. But tonight, chaos cracked it open. The patient's vitals plummeted, alarms shrieked, and sweat gathered on the forehead of Dr. Richard Hale, the surgeon everyone believed was untouchable. His hands trembled. His voice broke. For the first time in his career, he panicked. The staff froze. Residents exchanged panicked glances. Dr. Victoria Sloan muttered under her mask, mocking the uselessness of the rookies. All eyes fell on Emily Carter, the quiet nurse who was usually invisible in this place of egos and titles. Her heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "I'll take over." The room erupted in disbelief. A rookie nurse? Taking the reins when the lead surgeon had lost control? The surgeon sneered, already certain of her failure. But Emily stepped forward anyway, calm as if she had trained for this very moment. What none of them knew was that she carried a hidden skill forged far from this polished hospital, and she was about to prove it. What follows is not just the story of a patient's survival, but of a quiet nurse who shattered arrogance with mastery, turning humiliation into triumph. Emily's words, "I'll take over," seemed to echo through the operating room like blasphemy. For a few seconds, no one moved. The steady hum of machines, the frantic beeping of the monitor, the hiss of oxygen, all of it felt amplified, as if the universe itself was mocking her courage. Dr. Richard Hale's eyes darted between the crashing vitals and the young nurse. His hands, usually steady and commanding, shook as he withdrew them from the surgical field. His silence said it all. He was paralyzed by fear. The residents noticed immediately. Their god had stumbled. Dr. Victoria Sloan smirked, unable to resist her cruel commentary. "A nurse? Really? This isn't a dress rehearsal, sweetheart. Step back before you kill someone." Her voice dripped with disdain. The residents chuckled, emboldened by her venom. The hierarchy of the OR was clear. Surgeons stood at the top, and nurses were meant to obey. And yet here was Emily Carter, shattering the unspoken rule with a single sentence. Inside, Emily's stomach twisted. She could feel the heat of their ridicule pressing against her skin. She thought of the months she had spent as invisible shadow, handing instruments, fetching supplies, keeping her head down. No one knew about the years before this, the volunteer work in makeshift clinics overseas, the emergency drills in war-torn zones, the desperate surgeries performed under tents with nothing but intuition and courage. But in the polished walls of St. Augustine, none of that mattered. Here, reputation was currency, and she had none. "Step aside, Carter," barked one of the senior residents, his voice smug. "This is real surgery, not a chance for you to play hero." The mockery spread like wildfire. Another resident, adjusting his mask, whispered loudly enough for her to hear, "She won't last 5 minutes. Watch her faint." The others snickered, emboldened by the cruelty of the moment. It wasn't just professional doubt, it was entertainment for them, a break in their otherwise rigid night. Emily's humiliation became their sport. But the monitors screamed louder. The patient's blood pressure plummeted. The pulse oximeter dropped like a stone. Every second lost was another inch closer to death. And still, Dr. Hale, the man celebrated on magazine covers, the one with plaques adorning the hospital walls, stood motionless. His reputation shattered before them all, leaving only silence and sweat. Dr. Sloan leaned closer to Emily, her eyes sharp and mocking. "If you really want to end your career before it starts, go ahead. One mistake, and it's over. Everyone here will remember you as the nurse who thought she was a surgeon." Her words were knives, meant to cut deeper than the scalpel Emily longed to hold. Emily gripped the edge of the sterile table, grounding herself. She heard their laughter, but chose to focus on the patient's shallow breaths, the weakening rhythm of a heart begging for intervention. Somewhere in her mind, memory surfaced, a boy in a refugee camp gasping for air as she performed an improvised procedure with nothing but basic tools, saving him when everyone else had given up. She had been doubted before. She had been dismissed before. And yet she had delivered. Her silence infuriated them. They wanted her to crack, to beg someone else to take the lead, to collapse under the crushing weight of shame. But she refused. Her calm gaze unsettled them more than her words ever could. "Look at her," Sloan said, her voice rising for the whole team to hear. "Trying to be a hero. When this patient dies, we'll know exactly who to blame." The residents laughed openly now, some even pulling down their masks for dramatic effect. One of them began keeping time on his watch, announcing in a mocking tone, 30 seconds until she breaks. Another added, "She'll faint before she even touches the scalpel." Their jeers grew crueler, the oar shifting into an arena of humiliation rather than healing. Emily's breathing slowed. She pushed their voices out. Her focus narrowed until all she saw was the fragile line of life on the monitor. Every insult, every chuckle, every sneer became background noise. She had been tested under fire, under bombs, under chaos that made this operating room feel like silence. This moment wasn't the end of her career, it was the test she had been forged for. Finally, Dr. Hale spoke. His voice cracked, brittle as glass. "Fine. If you think you can do better, then do it. But understand this, if you fail, you'll never step foot in this hospital again." He staggered back, surrendering the space not out of trust but desperation. His authority was collapsing, and he clung to the only power left, the threat of exile. The challenge landed like a hammer blow. The room fell utterly silent, every pair of eyes now locked on Emily. Some watched with cruel anticipation, eager for her collapse. Others, quieter, wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, she had something to prove. But none voiced it aloud. Their bets were cast, their minds certain, she would fall apart. Emily lifted her chin. The fluorescent lights glared above, heat pressing against her skin. She stepped toward the patient, her presence small yet commanding. In this moment, the air was charged with doubt, with arrogance, with fear. The hospital's hierarchy weighed down on her shoulders, daring her to crumble. But she did not crumble. She stood firm, hands steady, heart calm. The stakes were clear, a patient's life hung by a thread, and her own career balanced on the edge of a blade. The residents leaned in, eager for her downfall. Dr. Sloan crossed her arms, smirking with certainty. Dr. Hale sank against the wall, broken. And there, in the center of the storm, Emily Carter prepared to defy them all. Before we see whether Emily rises or crumbles under the crushing weight of this challenge, let me pause for just a moment. Because what's happening here isn't only about surgery, it's about courage, about daring to step forward when everyone else doubts you. And that's the kind of story we tell here all the time. So, if you've been holding your breath, if you felt your heart race as Emily stood her ground against arrogance and humiliation, make sure you're subscribed to this channel right now. That way, you won't miss the powerful turn that's about to come, not only in Emily's fight to save a life, but in the way she proves that true strength often hides in the most underestimated people. Alright, let's get back into the operating room, because Emily is just getting started. The room held its breath as Emily stepped forward. Every motion was deliberate, every breath measured. She slipped into the space Dr. Hale abandoned, adjusting her gloves as though she had been waiting for this her entire life. Her hands hovered over the open incision, the patient's life bleeding away by the second. The jeers and whispers around her pressed in like a storm, but her eyes were locked on the task. "Scalpel," she said firmly. The scrub nurse hesitated, glancing at Dr. Sloan, who rolled her eyes and nodded mockingly. The scalpel was passed as if it were part of a cruel game. Emily accepted it without flinching. Her grip was steady, her mind razor-sharp. She scanned the surgical field, tracing the source of the crisis. A ruptured vessel, hidden deep, had turned the operation into a ticking time bomb. She recognized it instantly. Memories of battlefield triage surged through her, where seconds meant life or death, where no one cared about titles, only results. She knew exactly what to do. Dr. Sloan muttered, "Watch her butcher it," loud enough for the room to hear. Laughter followed. Emily ignored it. Her voice carried calm authority. "Suction. Clamp. Retractor, now." The staff, stunned by her composure, obeyed despite themselves. The tools clicked into place around her, the surgical field opening like a map she alone could read. Every command snapped the team back into rhythm, even as disbelief lingered in their eyes. She isolated the vessel with precision that contradicted her title of rookie. The bleeding slowed, but the patient's vitals remained critical. She moved quickly, improvising a maneuver that few would have dared attempt. Her hands were not simply following protocol, they were dancing, guided by experience far beyond her years. Gasps rippled as one of the residents realized what she was doing. That's not in any of the standard manuals," he whispered. "No," another replied, wide-eyed. "But it's working." The monitors responded faintly, the flat decline slowing into a fragile plateau. The patient was hanging on, balanced between death and salvation. Dr. Sloan scowled. "Beginner's luck," she muttered, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. For the first time, doubt cracked her mask of superiority. Emily didn't pause to savor it. Her focus was absolute. Her world had narrowed to a single truth: this patient would not die on her watch. She bent closer, stitching and repairing with practiced speed, pulling the body back from the brink inch by inch. Around her, the arrogance of the room faltered. Whispers died into silence. Residents leaned in, not to mock, but to learn. Dr. Hale stood frozen against the wall, his shame growing with every precise movement Emily made. But just as the vitals began to stabilize, another complication struck. The patient's heart stuttered violently, arrhythmia flashing across the monitor. The room gasped as the beeping accelerated into chaos. Dr. Sloan stepped forward with venom in her voice. "You see? She's out of her depth. Step aside before you kill him." Emily's jaw tightened. She didn't step back. Instead, she pressed her gloved hand against the patient's chest, eyes narrowing with determination. "Charge the paddles," she ordered. The staff hesitated, it wasn't her place. But something in her tone, the unshakable certainty, compelled them to obey. The tension in the oar sharpened to a knife's edge. Emily Carter was about to attempt the impossible, and everyone knew it. Either she would bring the patient back, or this would be the end of her career before it had even begun. The defibrillator paddles hummed to life, the charge building with a rising whine that cut through the silence. Emily's eyes never left the patient's chest. Her voice rang steady, commanding, clear. The shock jolted through the patient, his body arching against the table. The monitor answered with jagged static, then silence. Gasps filled the room. A second passed, then two, an eternity measured in heartbeats that did not come. "Again," Emily said. Her voice betrayed no fear. The paddles charged, the tension thick enough to choke. Clear. Another jolt. The body jumped once more. This time, the monitor sputtered, then flickered with a weak but present rhythm. The oar held its breath as the line steadied into a fragile pulse. It wasn't strong, but it was life. The residents stared in disbelief. No one laughed now. Even Dr. Sloan's smirk dissolved, her mask of superiority cracking into something dangerously close to awe. Emily didn't stop. With the vessel stabilized and the heart's rhythm returning, she moved with renewed urgency. Epinephrine. Sutures. Let's close carefully. Every command carried certainty, weaving order out of chaos. The team obeyed instinctively, no longer mocking, no longer hesitating. The nurse who had been invisible just hours ago now led them with precision. Her stitching was flawless, efficient but elegant, a choreography honed through countless unseen battles. Sweat gathered on her brow, but her hands never faltered. She wasn't improvising anymore, she was teaching, showing them a mastery they had refused to acknowledge. At the edge of the room, Dr. Hale's face was ashen. His career had been built on prestige, on never losing control. Now, stripped of his godlike aura, he watched a rookie nurse succeed where he had failed. His silence was deafening. "Vitals stabilizing," one resident whispered, all flooding his tone. She's saving him." The rhythm on the monitor strengthened, steadied, grew bold. The once bleeding vessel was sealed, the heart recovered, the body stitched back together with hands that defied every assumption made about them. Finally, Emily set down her tools and stepped back. Her chest rose and fell with controlled breaths. The patient lived. For a moment, no one spoke. The air vibrated with disbelief. The hierarchy of the room had been rewritten in the span of minutes. And then, slow, hesitant, a voice broke the silence. "Impeccable technique," said Dr. Alan Reeves, a senior cardiothoracic specialist who had been observing quietly from the corner. Known for his harsh critiques, Reeves rarely praised anyone. His eyes were sharp, but his words carried weight. That maneuver with the vessel, innovative, effective. And the resuscitation, textbook execution. The roar erupted into murmurs. Recognition from Reeves was rarer than gold. Emily didn't bask in it. She simply nodded, humbly, as though it were all just part of her duty. Dr. Sloane's lips pressed in, her pride swallowing shards of humiliation. The residents avoided her gaze, their earlier jeers now bitter ash in their mouths. Even Dr. Hale, still slumped against the wall, had no words left. His authority, once unquestionable, was in ruins. Emily, meanwhile, stripped off her gloves with quiet composure. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Her victory was not for herself, but for the patient who breathed because she refused to yield. The impossible had been done. And for everyone in that room, the memory of this night would never fade. The silence that followed was unlike anything the operating room had ever known. Machines beeped steadily, announcing the victory of life reclaimed, but no one dared to speak. The air was heavy, reverent, as though they all understood they had witnessed a rewriting of the rules. Emily removed her gloves, her movements humble and precise, as if she had simply finished an ordinary shift. She gave the patient a final glance, ensuring stability, then quietly stepped back. Her face carried no triumph, only relief. She hadn't fought for recognition, she had fought for survival, the patient's survival. The residents shifted uneasily, remembering every cruel word they had thrown at her, every whispered bet against her. Shame flushed their faces. None dared meet her eyes. They had mocked her as a novice, but now they saw her as something far greater, a professional who had shown them what true courage looked like. Dr. Sloane was the first to break the silence, though her voice trembled. You got lucky," she muttered, but the words rang hollow. The confidence that had once dripped from her tone was gone, stripped away by the undeniable truth on the monitors. No one backed her. No one laughed. She was alone in her bitterness. Dr. Hale, once untouchable, remained slumped against the wall. His failure weighed heavier than the leaden air. For years he had ruled with arrogance, humiliating those beneath him, crushing mistakes with scorn. Tonight, he had been the one to falter. And the one he had dismissed without thought had risen in his place. His silence was punishment enough, the collapse of his reputation echoing louder than any insult. At last, Dr. Reeves, the respected specialist who had praised Emily moments earlier, stepped forward. He looked directly at her, his voice calm but carrying through the room. "That patient is alive because of you. What I saw here tonight deserves recognition." Emily bowed her head slightly, her humility unshaken. "I only did what needed to be done." It was that answer, not a boast, not a claim of superiority, that broke the last of the room's resistance. The residents nodded quietly, some even whispering apologies. Sloane turned away, unable to face the truth. And Hale, he sank deeper into his own silence, knowing he would never command the same reverence again. Justice had found them, not through anger, but through undeniable contrast. Emily's quiet strength illuminated their arrogance, and the weight of their own cruelty fell back on their shoulders. As the night drew on, Emily left the operating room without fanfare. The hospital corridors buzzed with rumors already, the rookie nurse who saved a patient when the lead surgeon froze. But Emily didn't linger to hear them. She walked steadily, her steps light, her heart calm. Recognition or not, she knew her worth had never depended on their approval. Back in the quiet of the nurse's lounge, she sat down, tying her hair back into its usual simple knot. Her reflection in the small mirror looked the same, plain, modest, unassuming. But Emily knew something had shifted. Not in her, but in them. She would return to her duties as always, invisible if she had to be, humble as ever. But no one who had been in that room would forget what she had done. And somewhere, in the steady beeping of a heart she had brought back to life, the truth rang louder than any applause: Emily Carter didn't need titles or status. She had proven her value where it mattered most, in the fight for a life that others had nearly surrendered. What you just witnessed isn't only the story of a surgery, it's the story of resilience, humility, and quiet strength shattering arrogance. Emily Carter didn't save that patient because of a title, or prestige, or recognition. She saved him because she cared, because she was prepared, and because she refused to back down when it mattered most. And maybe that's a reminder for all of us. No matter how underestimated you feel, no matter how loudly others doubt you, your moment will come. And when it does, the world will finally see what you're capable of. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you feel when Emily stood her ground in that operating room? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's build a community that celebrates courage, humility, and true strength. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next powerful story we share here. Until then, remember, greatness doesn't always wear a title. Sometimes, it wears scrubs and stays humble.